Engine block back from my machine buddy. I also got the head back. He put new sleeves in for me and new camshaft bearings. He also pressed the bearings into the connecting rods for me, and I got the new pistons and everything here. Put all that back on here. That's all done, then I gotta get all that crap and this back on there. Put the main bearings in, you need to make sure these holes line up with the oil channels of the block. You know, some bearings will come with 2 of them, like this one you can see is not being used for different models, but as long as this one lines up, because this is what feeds oil to the bearings to lubricate the crank. The crank is cleaned up and ready to go, the bearings are in the block, so I gotta make sure I lube it up with some assembly lube and then drop the crank down. So it's not hard, you just gotta make sure you get on the surfaces, you know, because you don't want to dry start this engine. The assembly lube, what it does, it gives it lubrication until the motor oil or the oil pump primes up the system. You know, all these oil channels in the block are empty, they're dry. Now I can drop the crank in. So we're going to get this picked up here and get it dropped down in. Make sure I don't smash my fingers on anything. And then give it a little spin just to make sure everything gets some lubrication on it. Now, since everything is lubed, you could just put these bearings right on. Everything has lubrication. But usually if this is a brand new engine, you want to check your gap on these main bearings with a plastic gauge to make sure everything was good. But I already know this will be good to go. You know, there might be a little bit of play in it, but not enough to worry about. It's all within specs. I almost forgot to put the tappets back in, but I could still put them in, you know, for the block. Gotta make sure you lube everything. I decided just to pull the crank back out quick and put the tappets in, so I'm not trying to reach down in there. Sure, I put these tappets exactly in the same spot as what they were. You know, going from back to front, put them right back in. If you're doing brand new tappets, you don't have to do this, but I'm reusing the original ones. But you definitely want to put the main bearings back in the same cylinders as they were. Same thing with the connecting rods. So it's all balanced and bolted down properly. And also, while I'm at it, I'm going to lube these camshaft bearings inside the block, and then I'm going to get the camshaft in. When you put the camshafts in, you got to make sure you put them in as straight as you can and be nice and gentle. You don't want to jam it in there and damage any of the bearings. You know, and now since I can get in here without the crankshaft, I can support the weight of this and try to keep it all lined up so everything fits in. If you can't put this in with your fingertips, you're doing something wrong. The crankshaft is in, so now I can put the crankshaft back in. So you just take the old bearings out and just drop in your new ones here. But again, make sure those oil holes line up. Now, these pumps can get very tricky. See, the gears sometimes don't mesh perfectly with them, so that's why you need to add or take away shims. So I already am putting this right back on. I'm not putting a new oil pump on here. So everything should be good to go. But what you would normally do is bolt this on, put some yellow marker paint stick on here, crank the motor over, and check to make sure that the way the teeth are contacting this are not tight and there's a little bit of a gap. Or you can feed a piece of paper through here and crank the motor over and check the gap that way. And then make sure this O-ring is good. You know, it's a brand new one. And just put it all back together. For now, I can turn this motor over, get ready to put the pistons down in. And once that's done and the head is on, then I can start working on like timing gears and everything. Before I flip this, I still got to torque all the main bolts down. Torque these down to their torque specs. It's about 98 foot-pounds of torque. with the torque wrench. And again, you want to double check your gapping on this to make sure it's all good. It's over and get ready to install the pistons here. I already marked these connecting rods when I took them out. So you see the 3 dots right there? That's cylinder 3. I have the number 3 cylinder piston connecting rod cap. Like before, when you put your new connecting rod bearings in, make sure these holes line up for the oil. Make sure to lube the top of the cylinder here. I lube the piston up and the connector rod bearing. This tool is to compress the piston rings so I can put it down in the cylinder. So you want to make sure these little divots are at the bottom. You get it over the piston here, then you crank it down tight. And this compresses the piston rings. Pistons and connecting rods are usually directional. So you can see the little arrow on them facing towards the front of the motor. I turn the crank so the connecting rod is at its lowest point. That's how it is with this cylinder. I hammer the piston down, but I use the wooden handle of the hammer to just tap it down in. Just like that. Make sure it goes in nice and smoothly. Just like that. I'm going to tap this down the rest of the way while feeling underneath to make sure that connecting rod lines up over the crank. And now it's against the crank. I'm going to do number 2 cylinder now. And once that's in, I'm going to flip it over and do the connecting rod bearings and bolt them together. And then do number 1 and 2 cylinder. Or you can reach under there and get number 2 and 3 at least tightened up to the pistons. And then do the other 4, and then you can rotate it. Got them all in. I'm going to turn it over now and bolt the connecting rods. Got to torque the connecting rods, and that's all done. Before I put the retainer in for the camshaft, I bolted that in. I also bolted the timing gear on for the camshaft. Made sure the timing marks are lined up perfectly. Now it's ready to put the studs in and get ready to put the head down on. I'm getting ready for, since none of these original gauges did not work, I got some aftermarket ones. These gauges fit in this dash. They're the standard gauge size, so I'm going to take this off later, remove some of these gauges and put these ones in. The gauges I want to work is the temperature and oil pressure. Those are the only 2 I really care about on this machine. I got the piece hooked up for the oil pressure. Temperature is going to have to be hooked on last because it's attached to this, so I can't really thread it onto the head and then put the engine in. Oil pressure is so important to me is if that oil pump went bad, I can do something without tearing it all apart. Is I can take the oil plug, the drain plug, and put an outlet on it, hook it to an electric oil, like an electric fuel pump, and pump it back into the oil channel. You know, and then I can have the pressure gauge right here, and I could still have good oil flow throughout the engine, even if that oil pump goes bad. Now the head studs are in. Now I'm ready for the head gasket. Sometimes these head gaskets are right side up or upside down. So this one is not marked top or bottom, so it doesn't matter on this one. And just get it all set down in here. I double checked all these holes, and this does go only one way. I saw this hole here, but not here, so I pulled it underneath, make sure that was lined up with the block. That must be an oil channel for the head to lubricate those valves. The rest of these are antifreeze or water or coolant, whatever you want to call it. You want to take your time, make sure these holes line up. So I noticed that had a hole and this one doesn't. I put the head gasket on the right way, but they should mark it top or bottom on these gaskets, but this one did not. Now the head is on. Now, I did not mention, you could put copper spray on these head gaskets to make sure they seal up good. But I'm not going to do that with this. It should be all good. It's all brand new and everything has been decked. But if you wanted to do it, you can. Make sure it's sitting flush all the way around before finish bolting this down. And now you torque these to the recommended torque specs, which is online. You can look them up for any motor. And you torque them from the center out as a spiral. That's all torqued down. I can actually get the rockers all put in now. The injectors in, made sure I put them back in the same cylinder. I also got the push rods in, and you want to make sure you visually look down inside with a light. Push rods could be off to the side. So this type of cam is a little difficult because these are all separate pieces. So you can try your best to try to put it together and put it down on. And when you tighten these bolts down, you got to do a little bit on each one until it all pushes down together in one piece. These are very tricky rockers on these old motors. Putting this on temporarily so I can turn the motor over so I can adjust my valve lash. I want to adjust the valve lash right here, and on this motor they want a 0.015. No, number one cylinder is on compression, so you just add tension until, see, this one has tons of room on it, so I just need to take this adjusting nut on the push rod and just adjust it until this tightens up right there. Now it has some tension on it. Now on to the next one. So you can see this one is really far out of adjustment. You can just hear that. And as the motor is running, this is what you hear. This is a rocker tick every time that cylinder opens. Now that's all done. Now I changed it to 0.10, more like a 12 valve Cummins on their intake valves, but that should be all good. Now this has the tiniest little bit of play that's not going to make any noise. Put the valve cover on with a brand new valve cover gasket. These old-fashioned valve cover gaskets could be a little tricky, so they give you these little ears, and what these do is tell you where the gasket is on the valve cover. So if this is sticking in where you can't see it, like sticking out of the valve cover, then you know you have an issue. Or if it's sticking out too much. So usually on these, I just lay them down where they are supposed to be, then I set the valve cover on, then I'll check it. And I could push these in or pull these out to adjust the valve cover gasket. And that's it. Now, I did not clean the valve cover perfectly on the outside because it does not matter. It's just going right back in the machine and going out working again. As long as the inside and the surfaces are clean, I don't really care about this stuff. So, I'm not painting the engine block or anything. It's just going back in the machine for work. The timing cover on this motor is very tricky because I don't know why, but they have a gasket here that bolts this timing cover to this head, you know, where antifreeze flows through here up through the head. I don't know why. It's a poor design because in order to take the head off, you got to take the timing cover off. In order to take the timing cover off, you have to take the oil pan off. I don't know why they do it, but that's what they do. So I put a little bit of grease on the gasket and stick it on, and also put some bolts through it. Same thing with the other bottom half of the gasket, and got it on there and got all the bolts started. It's very tricky on this motor, but you know, it's doable. Got the timing cover on, water pump, I got the power steering pump on, I got the intake manifold bolted up. I have all the injector lines to hook up, the exhaust. Then I got the oil pan to put on, alternator, flywheel, and then it's ready to bolt up to the motor. But I'm still waiting on that gasket still, between the motor and transmission. The gasket for the starter, I'm just going to use Permatex on that. I've done it before. It's not that big of a deal. So, on my old machine. So I'm getting really close to at least getting this motor at least in, and then I have all the other stuff to do. Once I get this in the machine, I'm going to get it hooked up so I could do a test run on it, make sure everything is all good to go before buttoning this all up. I still got a pinhole in the radiator. I got to solder because I put a hole in it when I was leaking. I got fittings I have to replace because they broke off. You know, it's still a ton of work to get this back together. And even once I get back together, I do want to take these packing kits out and replace them. Because of this machine, how old it is, you can see how on this one, the seal's already cracked. All these packing kits are bad. I replaced some of the hoses, like this one. I still got this hose to replace, some of the ones underneath. but all the packing kits on the cylinders and also the backhoe all still need to be rebuilt. But once that's all done, I do have a little adjustment on the brakes to do. Eventually I want to get some new tires once these get. Before I bought the machine for $5,000, I've put about, I think, 6,000 hours on it until this happened. So I should be able to get another probably 20,000 hours on it by the time I'm all done. Out of pocket so far between the repairs I have done on this with hydraulic hoses and this motor. This motor is going to cost me about $2,000. I've already put about $1,000 into the machine of some hydraulic hoses and batteries and fluids and filters and stuff. So when I'm all said and done, it'll probably be close to $10,000. But I cannot really buy the same machine for the same price. $10,000. I can get one of these machines in mint condition, but I still don't know what I have. At least here, I know what I have. A few pieces for the 3-point hitch assembly. I still need this output shaft and cover for the differential. I still need the arms that come out and then the piece that comes off there, so I can they go from here to the arms. So once I get all that hardware, I can actually use the 3-point hitch on this. I want to get one of those finish mower decks, so I can use this to cut all the grass in my field on my property. So future plans, try to do more with this machine than just digging dirt and digging stumps and stuff like that. If you ever need to make gaskets out of gasket paper, it comes in sheets. You can go out to any auto parts store, but basically whatever surface you're trying to match up, you just lay it over top, and then if you just work the hammer a little bit, see, there's that edge, and then you gotta find the hole. There's the bolt hole. See? And you can keep working around. It'll pretty much cut itself. Then same thing with the outside. You just can't have it move. But basically you can easily make a perfect gasket if the engine chain on. Usually you want to use a chain that bolts. Make sure these are tight, they're not loose, otherwise I could snap those off. Usually almost all engines will have bolt holes here and here in the front, something else you can use. But on this one, it's easier just to use this one. You don't want to go straight forward and back with a chain because the motor could twist one side or the other. You want to keep it like that because it kind of balances itself out. Sometimes you have to go one link forward or back to angle the motor back or forward so it lines up better, whatever vehicle you're working on. Make sure you're using a strong enough chain, strong enough cherry picker or a machine or like a overhead crane or something, so the less risk of these falling off on the ground, damaging them, especially like that oil pan. If I damage that, it's going to be a pain in the butt to try to get another one. If it dropped on its side and cracked the engine block right open, that's just going to cost me about $3,000 for a new block. So you want to make sure you do these things carefully. On my starter, I was able to make a gasket out of gasket paper.